What happens when a man who can buy anything tries to silence a woman who has nothing? This isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about the moment a dismissive, arrogant tycoon, a man used to the world bending to his will, made one simple, brutal demand of a young woman just trying to earn her living. In this country, you speak English. He expected her to crumble. He expected fear. What he got instead was a reply so shocking, so impossibly fluent in 5 different languages, that it didn't just stun him into silence, it unraveled his entire empire. Stay with us to hear the incredible true story of Ilara Vance. Ethelgard's wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The air itself seemed expensive, thick with the scent of white truffle vintage leather and the quiet, confident murmur of old money. For the patrons, it was a sanctuary. For the staff, it was a gilded cage where they moved like silent ghosts, their individuality scrubbed away and replaced by a crisp black uniform and an unwavering smile. Among these ghosts was Ilara Vance. To the casual observer, she was just another waitress, efficient, quiet, and possessing a kind of serene grace that made her seem almost invisible, a perfect cook in Ethelgard's flawless machine. She was 24, but a weariness in her deep green eyes made her seem older. Her movements were precise, born of a discipline that seemed out of place among the clatter of silver and porcelain. Her colleague, a bubbly and perpetually stressed waitress named Chloe, often joked that Ilara could carry a tray of champagne flutes through a hurricane without spilling a drop. "You're a machine, Elle," Chloe whispered one Tuesday evening as they polished wine glasses behind the service bar. "I swear you don't even breathe the same air as the rest of us mortals." Ilara offered a small, sad smile. "Just focused, Chloe. You know how Marco gets." Marco, the restaurant's manager, was a man whose spine was made of jelly and whose temperament was dictated by the size of a customer's tip. He orbited the floor with a perpetual cringe, terrified of offending the titans of industry who treated Ethelgard's as their private cafeteria. And there was no titan more fearsome than Damian Blackwood. The name was spoken in hushed tones among the staff. Blackwood wasn't just rich, he was a force of nature, a corporate raider who had built Blackwood Industries from nothing into a global behemoth. He was ruthless, sharp-tongued, and notoriously impatient. He dined at Ethelgard's 3 times a week, always at table 7, a secluded corner booth that offered a commanding view of the entire room. He demanded perfection and treated the staff not as people, but as extensions of the furniture. "He's coming in tonight," Marco announced during the pre-service briefing, his voice trembling slightly. "Table 7, 8 p.m. sharp. He's hosting a potential partner from France. I want everything, and I mean everything, to be flawless. Ilara, you're on his section. You're the only one I trust not to crack." A collective sigh of relief went through the other waiters. Serving Blackwood was a trial by fire. He would send back a steak if it was a single degree over medium-rare complain, if the ice in his water melted too quickly and his glare could curdle cream. Ilara simply nodded. "Of course, Marco." Inside, however, a familiar knot of ice tightened in her stomach. It wasn't just Blackwood's temper that unnerved her. It was him. The sight of his face, the severe jaw, the cold, calculating blue eyes, the perfectly tailored suits that cost more than her yearly salary, was like a physical blow. Each time he walked into the restaurant, it was a ghost from a past she had fought desperately to bury. A past of unimaginable privilege and even more unimaginable pain. She had once lived in his world, She had attended galas in rooms grander than this spoken to world leaders and never once worried about the price of anything. That life had been shattered, burned to the ground by betrayal and scandal. Her family name Vance, once synonymous with philanthropy and integrity, was now a toxic whisper in the circles Blackwood frequented. Her father, Robert Vance, had been his mentor, his friend, and Damien Blackwood had been the architect of his downfall. Now here she was, Elara Vance, the heiress in exile, reduced to serving the very man who had destroyed her family, stolen their legacy, and left her with nothing but a new name and a desperate need to remain invisible. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a survivor, hiding in plain sight, and tonight she was about to serve her monster. As the clock ticked closer to 8 p.m., Elara meticulously checked table 7. The silverware was aligned with military precision. The crystal glasses were so clean, they seemed to disappear. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing down her apron. She was no longer Elara Vance, daughter of Robert Vance. Tonight, she was just a waitress. She had to be. Her survival depended on it. At precisely 8:00 p.m., the heavy oak doors of Ethelgard's swung open. Damien Blackwood strode in, not so much walking as conquering the space before him. He was a man in his late 40s, his dark hair lightly dusted with silver at the temples, radiating an aura of raw, unapologetic power. Behind him trailed a shorter, older gentleman with a kind face and impeccably styled grey hair, who looked slightly overwhelmed by Blackwood's pace. This was Monsieur Dubois, the French investor. Marco scurried forward, bowing and scraping. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Blackwood didn't even glance at him, his eyes scanning the restaurant with an air of bored ownership. "Of course it is." He led his guest to table 7, settling into the booth and immediately pulling out his phone. Elara watched from the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. Be invisible. Be a ghost. She picked up 2 leather-bound menus and a bottle of sparkling water plastered on her professional smile and approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Ethelgard's. May I offer you some water to begin?" She asked, her voice calm and even. Blackwood didn't look up from his phone. "Still, and make it quick." Monsieur Dubois, however, offered her a warm smile. "Bonsoir, pour moi de l'eau gazeuse, s'il vous plaît." "Good evening. For me, sparkling water, please." Without missing a beat, Elara replied in flawless, Parisian-accented French. "Bien sûr, monsieur. Un excellent choix." "Of course, sir. An excellent choice." She turned to fill his glass from the bottle she was holding. For the first time, Damien Blackwood looked up. His eyes, cold as a winter sky, narrowed on her. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He clearly hadn't understood the exchange and hated being on the outside of anything. Monsieur Dubois was charmed. He continued in French, "It is a delight to hear my own language spoken so beautifully. You are French?" "My family has roots there, sir," Elara replied smoothly, still in French. "I am glad to make you feel at home." Blackwood slammed his phone down on the table. The sound made Marco, hovering 10 feet away, jump. "Enough?" Blackwood's voice was a low growl that cut through the restaurant's ambiance. Heads at nearby tables turned. "I am conducting business here, in America, with an American company." He fixed his piercing gaze on Elara, his lip curling in a sneer. "You will speak English. Only English. Is that understood?" The condescension in his tone was suffocating. He didn't see a person. He saw a disobedient appliance. Monsieur Dubois looked embarrassed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Damien, please, she was only being polite." "I don't pay for polite, Jean-Luc. I pay for service." Blackwood snapped his eyes, still locked on Elara. "So let's try this again. From the top. In English." The world seemed to slow down for Elara. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to retreat, to become invisible again. It was the safe thing to do. But something inside her, a long dormant spark of the Vance pride of the brilliant, educated woman she once was, refused to be extinguished. She looked at the face of the man who had called her father brother before stabbing him in the back, the man who had stripped her of her home, her name, her future, and he was ordering her to be small. She held his gaze. The polite, vacant waitress smile vanished, replaced by a look of cool, unreadable composure. She turned first to Monsieur Dubois and spoke in his native tongue. "Monsieur, je vous prie de m'excuser pour cette interruption. Votre confort est ma priorité." "Sir, please excuse this interruption. Your comfort is my priority." Then she shifted her posture slightly and addressed Blackwood. But the words that came out were not in English. They were in crisp, perfect Italian, her tone as sharp as shattered glass. "Signore, la sua maleducazione è pari solo alla sua ignoranza. Qui la cortesia è la lingua universale." "Sir, your rudeness is matched only by your ignorance. Here courtesy is the universal language." Blackwood's jaw went slack. He stared at her, utterly bewildered. He understood nothing but the defiant tone. Before he could react, she shifted again, her expression hardening. This time the words were in fluent, cutting Spanish. "Quizás si tratara a la gente con un mínimo de respeto, no necesitaría exigirles que se rebajen a su nivel." "Perhaps if you treated people with a modicum of respect, you wouldn't need to demand they stoop to your level." Monsieur Dubois' eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and dawning amusement. Marco looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Elara wasn't finished. She straightened to her full height, her voice now flowing in precise, articulate German, a language known for its authority. "Ein Mann von ihrer Position sollte wissen, dass wahre Macht nicht im Befehlen liegt, sondern im Verstehen. A man of your position should know that true power lies not in commanding, but in understanding." By now, a stunned silence had fallen over the surrounding tables. Everyone was staring. Damien Blackwood, the master of the universe, the man who silenced boardrooms with a single word, was being verbally dismantled by a waitress in 4 languages he couldn't comprehend. His face, usually a mask of cold control, was a canvas of pure, undiluted fury and humiliation. Finally, Elara looked him directly in the eye. She leaned in, just slightly, her voice dropping to a calm, clear, and impeccably enunciated Oxford English, the kind of English spoken in the halls of power he so desperately admired. "But of course, Mr. Blackwood, you are the customer and you demand English. So in English, I shall be happy to take your order. Or would you perhaps need a few more moments to compose yourself?" The sting of her final perfect English sentence was the most potent blow of all. It wasn't just a reply. It was a declaration. She hadn't just spoken. She had shown him that his world was small and hers was vast. The waitress he had tried to humiliate was in that moment entirely his superior. And in the dead silence of the opulent dining room, Damien Blackwood had no idea what to do. The silence that followed Elara's multilingual tour de force was deafening. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. Damien Blackwood's face had cycled through a spectrum of emotions. Shock, rage, and now a deeply unsettling, calculating stillness. His mask of control was back in place, but the fury behind his eyes burned hotter than ever. He had been publicly outmaneuvered, his authority shredded by an employee he wouldn't have recognized on the street a half-hour ago. Without a word, he pushed his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the marble floor. He threw his napkin onto the table. "Jean-Luc, we're leaving." Monsieur Dubois, looking both mortified and deeply impressed, began to protest. "Damien." Wait, she was remarkable. "Now." Blackwood commanded, his voice a low threat. He stalked towards the exit, not looking back. Monsieur Dubois gave Elara a final apologetic glance before hurrying after his host. The moment the doors swung shut behind them, the restaurant erupted in a flurry of whispers. Elara stood frozen by the table, her adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a cold dread. She had won the battle, but she was certain she had just lost the war. Her job, her anonymity, her carefully constructed safe haven, it was all about to vanish. Marco rushed over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "Are you insane? That was Damien Blackwood. He could buy this entire city block and turn it into a parking lot just to spite us." "He was rude, Marco," Chloe said, appearing at Elara's side, a look of awe on her face. "He deserved it. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." "Incredible? She's fired. That's what's incredible." Marco sputtered, wringing his hands. "Elara, my office. Now." As Elara walked across the dining room, she could feel every eye on her. But one pair of eyes held a different quality. They belonged to an elderly gentleman sitting alone at a small table by the window. He was impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket, with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He hadn't been whispering. He had been watching the entire exchange with a keen, analytical interest. As Elara passed, he met her gaze and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The gesture was so small, yet it sent a strange shiver of validation through her. Inside Marco's cramped office, the lecture was as predictable as it was frantic. He paced back and forth, ranting about profit margins, reputation, and the wrath of Damien Blackwood. "I have no choice. I have to let you go. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Please just clear out your locker and leave quietly." Elara simply nodded. She had expected this. "I understand, Marco." There was no point in arguing. She had known the consequences. She changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room, her hands shaking slightly. Chloe found her there. "Don't worry about this, Elle," Chloe said, her voice fierce. "Any restaurant in New York would kill to have you." "That was legendary. You're my hero." "Thanks, Chloe," Elara said, managing a weak smile. But as she walked out the back door into the cool night air, the reality of her situation hit her. She was jobless, with barely enough money for next month's rent. Blackwood now knew her face. Her invisibility was gone. What if he decided to dig deeper? What if he discovered who she really was? The fear she had kept at bay for so long came rushing back. Meanwhile, in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, Damien Blackwood was silent, staring out at the blurred city lights. The humiliation gnawed at him. It wasn't just that a waitress had defied him. It was the way she had done it, with an intellectual and cultural superiority that he couldn't buy or bully. It was a language of the world he didn't speak, and it infuriated him. He pulled out his phone and made a call not to his driver, but to his head of security, a ruthless former Mossad agent named Kyle. Kyle, Blackwood's voice was dangerously calm. I have a task for you. The waitress at table 7 at Ethelgard's tonight. The one with the green eyes. I want to know everything about her. Her name, her address, where she was born, what she had for breakfast this morning. Everything. And I want it on my desk by morning. He hung up. This wasn't about getting a waitress fired anymore. This was about power. He needed to understand the weapon that had been used against him. He needed to know who she was. He had a feeling, a cold premonition in the pit of his stomach, that she was more than just a waitress. And Damien Blackwood hated surprises. Back on the street outside the restaurant, Elara clutched her worn coat around her and began the long walk to the subway. As she turned the corner onto a quieter side street, a calm voice spoke from the shadows. That was an extraordinary display, Miss Vance. Elara froze her blood, turning to ice. Vance? He had used her real name. She spun around to see the elderly gentleman from the restaurant stepping out from a doorway. He had a gentle smile, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. Who are you? Elara asked, her voice tight with alarm, taking a step back. How do you know that name? My name is Alistair Finch, he said, extending a hand which she ignored. And I knew your father. Robert was one of my dearest friends. I was his lawyer and his confidant for over 20 years. Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. Alistair Finch? The name was familiar, a relic from a buried life. He was the one who had tried to fight for her father, the one who disappeared after the trial, after everything was lost. I've been looking for you for 3 years, Elara. Alistair said, his voice soft with sympathy. Ever since you vanished, I never believed for a second what they said about your father. And I know who was behind it all. He gestured back towards Ethelgard's, where the lights still glowed warmly. You just served him dinner, Alistair said, his voice grim. And tonight you did something I've been trying to do for years. You got under Damien Blackwood's skin. You made him lose control. And in doing so, you may have just given us the opening we've been waiting for. He pulled a simple white business card from his pocket. He will come for you now. Not to fire you, but to understand you. When he does, you will be ready. Call me. It's time to stop hiding, Elara. It's time to fight back. He pressed the card into her hand and melted back into the shadows, leaving Elara standing alone on the sidewalk, the small piece of cardstock in her palm, feeling as heavy as the keys to her entire past. The sun rose over Manhattan, but Damien Blackwood hadn't slept. He sat in his penthouse office, a glass cage overlooking Central Park, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. On the polished obsidian surface of his desk lay a single file delivered by his security chief, Kyle, an hour earlier. The file's cover was stark white, bearing a single name, Elara Vance. He had expected to find a history of a struggling immigrant, perhaps a student working her way through college. He had anticipated a simple, easily digestible story that would explain her linguistic talents and quell the burning humiliation from the night before. What he found instead was a ghost. He opened the file. The first page was a photograph, a professional headshot from 3 years ago. The young woman in the picture was smiling, her green eyes bright with a life and hope he had not seen in the tired waitress. Her name was listed as Elara Annalise Vance. Date of birth, May 12, 2001, place of birth, New York, New York. And then the line that made the air in the room grow cold. Daughter of Robert and Eleanor Vance. Blackwood felt a jolt as if he'd touched a live wire. Vance. It couldn't be. He read it again, his mind racing, connecting the dots with the brutal efficiency that had made him a billionaire. The hair, the eyes, the aristocratic poise she had displayed even in a waitress uniform. It was all there. It was her, the daughter of the man he had destroyed. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in the silent room. A flood of memories long suppressed rushed to the surface. He saw Robert Vance not as the disgraced felon the world remembered, but as the man he had been, brilliant kind, a titan of ethical investment and philanthropy, who had taken a young, hungry Damien Blackwood under his wing. Robert had been his mentor, his champion, the closest thing he'd ever had to a father. Business is about building. Damien. Not just acquiring. Robert used to say, his voice full of warmth, as they stood on the construction site of a new community center funded by the Vance Foundation. You build wealth, yes, but you also build communities, you build futures. That is the real legacy. Damien had admired him. He had even loved him in his own way. But admiration had curdled into envy. Robert's vision was about legacy. Damien's was about power. He saw Robert's philanthropy not as noble, but as a weakness, a diversion of funds that could be used for aggressive expansion. He saw Robert's trust as a vulnerability to be exploited. The betrayal had been a masterpiece of corporate warfare. It was slow, meticulous, and utterly devastating. Over 2 years, Blackwood had created a shadow network of shell corporations. He had siphoned small, untraceable amounts from the Vance Foundation's international accounts, rerouting them through a labyrinth of offshore entities before funneling them into a single account in the Cayman Islands, an account opened in Robert Vance's name using forged documents. The final move was to orchestrate an anonymous tip to the SEC. He had manufactured a paper trail that painted Robert as a hypocrite and a thief, a man who preached charity while secretly embezzling millions for himself. The evidence was circumstantial, but expertly crafted. Blackwood, as Robert's trusted protégé and COO, was the one who tearfully discovered the final damning piece of fabricated evidence. He played the part of the heartbroken disciple, forced to expose his fallen idol. The trial was a media circus. Robert Vance, a man renowned for his integrity, was crucified. He maintained his innocence, but the web Blackwood had woven was too intricate. He was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. His reputation was shattered, his fortune frozen, and his company, Vance Global, was left vulnerable. With the company teetering on the brink of collapse, Damien Blackwood, the hero who had uncovered the truth, stepped in. Using his own rapidly growing capital, he initiated a hostile takeover, buying up the company for pennies on the dollar. He absorbed its assets, its technology, and its charitable foundation, rebranding it all under the Blackwood Industries umbrella. He had not just defeated his mentor, he had consumed him, erasing his legacy and writing his own over it. Robert Vance died in prison less than a year later. The official cause of death, a heart attack. The world said it was a weak heart broken by shame. Blackwood knew it was a strong heart broken by betrayal. Robert's wife, Eleanor, had succumbed to illness shortly after, and their daughter, Elara, the brilliant young linguist who had been studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, had simply vanished. Blackwood had assumed she had taken what little money was left and disappeared broken and defeated. He had been wrong. She hadn't run. She had hidden. She had burrowed into the heart of his city, taking a menial job, living a life of anonymity, right under his nose, for 3 years. A cold, terrifying thought crept into his mind. Was it a coincidence? Had she simply ended up at his favorite restaurant by chance? Or was this something more? Was she hunting him? The defiance in her eyes last night. It wasn't just an angry waitress. It was the righteous fury of a daughter defending her father's memory. Blackwood stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The waitress was no longer a puzzle. She was a threat, a loose end from the most ruthless chapter of his life, a chapter he thought was closed forever. She was a living reminder of the one thing he feared, the truth. He had built his empire on the ruins of her family. He had taken everything from her, and now she had taken something from him, his peace of mind. He turned back to his desk, his decision made. He couldn't crush her like he would a normal business rival. That would be too noisy, too suspicious. He couldn't have her disappear. That would draw attention. No, this required a different strategy. The one Robert Vance himself had taught him long ago. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He picked up his phone and dialed his personal assistant. Catherine, get me Ethelgard's on the line. I want to speak to the manager. No, on second thought, cancel that. He paused, a cruel, brilliant plan forming in his mind. Find the home address of the waitress from last night. The one Kyle investigated. Her name is Ilara Vance. I'm going to pay her a visit. I have a job offer for her. He would bring her into his world, into his company. He would control her, watch her, and if necessary, break her completely. He would turn the ghost of Robert Vance into his own prized possession. Ilara spent a sleepless night on the lumpy couch in her tiny fourth-floor walk-up apartment in Queens. The business card Alistair Finch had given her sat on the rickety coffee table, a stark white rectangle that represented either a lifeline or a trap. The name Vance, spoken aloud after so many years, still echoed in her ears. Her carefully constructed anonymity was gone. The morning brought with it the harsh reality of her situation. No job-dwindling savings, and the looming shadow of Damien Blackwood. She spent hours online researching Alistair Finch. The search results confirmed everything he'd said. He was a highly respected corporate lawyer, known for his fierce loyalty to his clients. He had defended her father with a passion that bordered on obsession, and then, after the verdict, had quietly retired from his high-profile firm, disappearing from public life. He was a man of integrity, a man her father had trusted implicitly. Finally, her hand shaking, she dialed the number on the card. Alistair answered on the first ring. I was hoping you'd call Ilara. His voice was a calm anchor in her sea of anxiety. She told him everything about losing her job, about the constant fear, about the suffocating weight of hiding for 3 years. You were never hiding, my dear, Alistair said gently. You were surviving. There's a difference. Your father would be so proud of the strength you've shown. Hearing those words, a dam inside her broke, and she wept for the first time in years for her father, for her mother, for the life that had been stolen from her. Alistair listened patiently. When she was finished, his tone became serious. Blackwood's investigation will have finished by now. He knows who you are. He will not see you as a threat to be eliminated, not yet. He will see you as an unknown variable to be controlled. He will make a move, likely something bold and unexpected. He'll want you where he can see you. What do I do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. For 3 years I've been gathering evidence against him, Alistair explained. I have financial records, sworn affidavits from former Vance Global employees he forced out. But it's all circumstantial, just like the evidence he used against your father. We are missing the final piece, the smoking gun. something from inside his inner circle, something that directly links him to the initial fraud. We need a key to his kingdom. A knock on her apartment door, loud and firm, made her jump. "Someone's at my door," she whispered frantically into the phone. "Stay calm, Elara." Alistair's voice was steady. "This is it. This is his move. Whatever he offers you, however he frames it, your answer must be yes. You need to become the key." Her heart pounded as she peered through the peephole. She didn't see a hulking security guard or a process server. She saw Damian Blackwood himself, standing in the dingy hallway of her building, looking utterly and dangerously out of place in his bespoke suit. She took a deep breath, ended the call with Alistair, and opened the door. Blackwood's eyes swept over her small apartment, taking in the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the stack of books on linguistics and history by her bed. It was a look of profound, arrogant pity. "Quite a fall from the Sorbonne, Miss Vance," he said, his voice smooth as venom. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "What do you want?" Elara asked, her voice steely. She refused to let him see her fear. "I admire talent," he said, circling her living room like a predator casing a den. "And what you did last night, while wildly inappropriate for a waitress, was a remarkable display of talent. A wasted talent." He stopped in front of her, his presence seeming to suck all the oxygen from the room. "I'm a man who collects rare and valuable things. Art companies people. Your linguistic ability is a rare commodity. I have a proposition for you." Elara remained silent, her expression a mask of neutrality, just as Alistair had coached. "I am expanding Blackwood Industries into several new international markets," he continued. "Russia, China, the Middle East. It requires delicate negotiations, a deep understanding of culture and language that my current team lacks. I need a special advisor, a personal translator who can move between these worlds seamlessly. The position comes with a 6-figure salary, a corporate apartment in my own building, and access to resources you can only dream of." He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. It was a golden cage, beautifully constructed and designed to imprison her. He was offering her a pale imitation of the life he had stolen from her, a life where her talents would serve his ambition. "Why me?" she asked, her voice level. A smirk played on his lips. "Let's call it a gesture of goodwill. Perhaps your father's situation was more complex than it appeared. Perhaps I feel a certain responsibility for the daughter of my former mentor." It was a lie, a manipulative twisting of the knife, and they both knew it. He was testing her, seeing if she would break, if she would accuse him. This was the moment. Alistair's words echoed in her mind. Become the key. She had to swallow her rage, her grief, her hatred, and play his game. She met his gaze, her green eyes holding his for a long moment. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You want to hire me for my language skills, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Very well. I accept your offer." Damian Blackwood smiled a cold, triumphant smile. He believed he had won. He had found the ghost that haunted him and put her on a leash, turning her into another one of his prized possessions. He had no idea that he had just willingly handed his greatest enemy the keys to his kingdom. The waitress was no longer a waitress. She was a Trojan horse, and she had just been welcomed inside the gates of Troy. The transition from a cramped queen's apartment to a sleek, minimalist corporate apartment on the 50th floor of Blackwood Tower was dizzying. One day, Elara was counting tips to make rent. The next, she was looking down on the city, from a window that seemed to span the horizon. The apartment was furnished with cold, expensive taste, all chrome glass and black leather. It felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell. A golden cut, just as she had imagined. Her new role as special advisor and personal translator to Damien Blackwood thrust her into the very heart of his empire. Her desk was situated in an office adjoining his own penthouse suite, separated only by a pane of smart glass that he could turn from transparent to opaque at the touch of a button. She was always on display, always under his watch. The first few weeks were a relentless test. Blackwood paraded her like a new acquisition. In a video conference with German industrialists, he would gesture to her impatiently. "Elara, tell them their profit-sharing proposal is an insult, but do it in a way that sounds like a compliment." She would seamlessly translate his brutal demands into diplomatically nuanced German, smoothing over his abrasive style and often salvaging the deal. During a tense negotiation with a Russian oligarch over oil futures, she caught a subtle mistranslation by the other party's interpreter, a single word that changed the liability clause by billions of dollars. She corrected it quietly in flawless Russian, earning a rare, fleeting look of genuine surprise from Blackwood. She played her part perfectly. She was diligent, efficient, and emotionally detached. To Blackwood and his executive team, she was an enigma, a linguistic prodigy with a mysterious past utterly devoted to her work. They saw her talent, but were blind to her purpose. Every night after the long days of navigating corporate shark-infested waters, she would return to her silent apartment and report to Alistair. "He's arrogant," she told him over an encrypted line. "His entire system is built on the assumption that no one is smart enough to challenge him. The security is focused outward to stop corporate espionage from his rivals. He's not looking for a threat on the inside." "That's our advantage," Alistair's voice crackled back. "The evidence we need is a digital ledger. I call it Project Nightingale. It was a shadow accounting system your father suspected Blackwood was using even before the takeover. It would detail the initial siphoning of funds from the Vance Foundation. It's the source code of his original sin. If it still exists, it will be on his central server, likely hidden behind layers of encryption." Elara's mission was clear. She had to find Project Nightingale. She began to use her unique position to her advantage. Her job required her to have high-level clearance to access documents for translation. She started by staying late, citing the need to prepare for an upcoming meeting with Japanese investors. Under the guise of studying financial reports, she began mapping Blackwood's server architecture. She used her knowledge of languages to her advantage, exploring files in different languages that other employees would overlook. One evening, while translating a series of old internal memos from Spanish, she found a reference to a server migration project from 5 years ago, right around the time of the Vance global takeover. The project leader was Blackwood's chief technology officer, a man named Gavin Thorne. The memo mentioned a legacy data preservation protocol for a defunct philanthropic asset. The Vance Foundation. This was her first real lead. Getting to Gavin Thorne was impossible. He was intensely private and fiercely loyal to Blackwood. So Elara targeted his deputy, a junior programmer who was struggling to learn Mandarin for a new project in Shanghai. Elara, coincidentally, met him in the company cafeteria and offered to help. Over several tutoring sessions, she subtly steered the conversation towards server security and data archiving. Feigning technical ignorance, she asked him innocent-sounding questions about how one would find very old, heavily encrypted files. "The old man is paranoid," the programmer grumbled one day, frustrated with a piece of code. He keeps the really old stuff on what we call the Ethelgard server. It's a ghost server air-gapped from the main network. You can only access it physically from the terminal in Thorne's office or, well, from the boss's personal console in the penthouse. The penthouse, the lion's den itself. An opportunity presented itself a week later. Blackwood was hosting a lavish dinner for a delegation from the United Arab Emirates. He needed Elara present to translate. The dinner would be held in the main entertaining area of his penthouse residence, 2 floors above their offices. "I'll need you on call for the entire evening," he commanded. "Stay in the penthouse study. Don't wander." As the party began, Elara was escorted to the study, a magnificent room lined with rare books. And in the corner on a massive mahogany desk sat Damien Blackwood's personal computer terminal. It was the console the programmer had mentioned. Her heart pounded. This was her chance. She had an hour, maybe 2, while Blackwood was occupied with his guests. She had a small USB drive given to her by Alistair, containing a sophisticated decryption program. She sat at the desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She bypassed the initial security layers using a password she had guessed weeks ago. Vance, 98. The year Blackwood had first joined her father's company. The arrogance of it made her sick. She was in. She navigated to the ghost server, the so-called Ethelgard server, named after the very restaurant where her new life had begun. And there it was, a single file cloaked in layers of heavy encryption named simply Nightingale. She inserted the USB drive. The decryption program began its work lines of code, scrolling rapidly down the screen. The progress bar moved agonizingly slowly. 10%, 25%, 50%. Suddenly she heard voices approaching the study. Blackwood's laugh, low and commanding, echoed from the hallway. He was coming back. Panic seized her. The progress bar was at 78%. She couldn't abort the transfer now. She had to create a diversion. Thinking fast, she scanned the room. Her eyes landed on a crystal decanter of whiskey on a nearby table. She grabbed it, rushed to the door, and as Blackwood and one of his guests reached the threshold, she tripped, sending the decanter crashing to the floor. Amber liquid and shards of crystal sprayed across the expensive rug. "Oh my God! Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry," she cried, feigning panic and clumsiness. "I was just going to get you a glass of water, and I stumbled." Blackwood looked from her to the mess on the floor, his face a mask of pure annoyance. "Clumsy girl," he snarled. "Get one of the house staff to clean this up, and get out of my sight. Go back to the office. I'll call you if I need you." "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I'm so sorry," she stammered, backing out of the room. As he turned his attention to his guest, grumbling about the incompetence of his staff, Elara glanced back at the computer screen. 99%. 100%. Transfer complete. She pulled the USB from the port with a trembling hand, just as a cleaner was summoned. She had it. She had the smoking gun. She had walked into the lion's den and stolen his most valuable secret right under his nose. Now all she had to do was get it to Alistair before the lion realized he'd been robbed. The next 48 hours were the most agonizing of Elara's life. She sent the encrypted file to Alistair immediately using a secure drop, but she still had to go into work and face Damien Blackwood, pretending that nothing had happened. She had to sit in her glass office, translating contracts and fielding calls, while Alistair and his team of forensic accountants worked frantically to decrypt and verify the contents of the Nightingale file. Blackwood was more volatile than usual, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He seemed to sense that something was amiss, a shift in the power dynamic he couldn't quite identify. His cold blue eyes would often rest on Elara, searching, probing, as if trying to see past the facade of the efficient employee to the enemy within. On the third day, the call came. It was a single pre-arranged text message from Alistair. "The nightingale is singing. It's time." It was a full confession in numbers. The file contained the original untampered records of the Vance Foundation's accounts, showing the small, systematic withdrawals. It also contained a separate ledger detailing exactly where that money was moved through Blackwood's shell corporations, and finally, a log of the deposits into the forged Cayman Islands account. It was the entire roadmap of his betrayal. Alistair had already forwarded the package to trusted contacts at the Department of Justice and the Wall Street Journal. The fuse had been lit. That afternoon, Elara was summoned to Blackwood's office. The smart glass was opaque. When she entered, she found him not at his desk, but standing by the vast window looking down at the city. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. "The server logs from my penthouse study show an unauthorized data transfer 2 nights ago," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He didn't turn to look at her. A very large file, heavily encrypted, was copied from a partitioned ghost drive, the drive I call Ethelgard. Elara's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir." "Wouldn't you?" He turned around slowly. In his hand was a single sheet of paper. He held it up. It was a printout of the surveillance log, showing her login credentials accessing the server. "It seems your password was used, Ms. Vance." He knew. The game was over. "It was a fitting name for the server, don't you think?" she replied, her voice steady, all pretense gone. "The place where the waitress you underestimated began the end of your empire." A flicker of shock crossed his face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "You have nothing. A stolen file. It's inadmissible. My lawyers will bury you in litigation until you're old and grey." "It's not about a court case anymore, Damien," she said, using his first name for the very first time. The sound of it from her lips seemed to physically wound him. "It's about the truth. The Wall Street Journal will be publishing their front-page story in about 20 minutes. The SEC has already convened an emergency hearing. The DOJ is preparing a warrant. Your board of directors is currently in a meeting I imagine you weren't invited to." He stared at her, the color draining from his face as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had been so focused on the legal battle, he hadn't anticipated the public evisceration. "Why?" he whispered, the single word full of disbelief. "I gave you everything back. The money, the status." "You gave me a cage," Elara shot back, her voice ringing with the repressed fury of 3 years. "You offered me trinkets after you stole my family's legacy. You destroyed my father, a man who treated you like a son, all for this." She gestured at the opulent office the city below. "For a kingdom built on lies. You didn't just steal his company, you stole his name. And that is what I'm taking back." His face contorted in rage. He took a menacing step towards her. "You little—" At that exact moment, the doors to his office burst open. 2 stern-faced individuals in dark suits, followed by several uniformed officers, strode in. One of them held up a badge. "Damien Blackwood," the lead agent said, his voice booming in the silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." Blackwood looked from the agents to Elara, his expression one of utter impotent fury. The master of the universe was trapped, his power vanishing like smoke. As they placed him in handcuffs, his eyes met Elara's one last time. In them, she saw no remorse, only the cold, hard realization of defeat. She walked out of the office past the stunned faces of the executive assistants and didn't look back. She took the elevator down to the ground floor, stepped out of Blackwood Tower into the bright afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. The fall of Damien Blackwood was swift and spectacular. The Nightingale file was irrefutable. His empire crumbled, his assets were seized, and the truth of his betrayal was laid bare for the world to see. More importantly, the Vance name was cleared. Robert Vance was posthumously exonerated, his story rewritten from one of shame to one of tragedy and honor. Lara, with the help of Alistair, used the restored family assets not to rebuild a corporation, but to relaunch her father's true legacy, the Vance Foundation. She became its public face, its driving force. Her linguistic skills were no longer a hidden weapon, but a powerful tool for good. She traveled the world negotiating aid packages in fluent Arabic in refugee camps, securing educational grants in Mandarin in rural China, and championing human rights in Spanish at the UN. She became everything her father had hoped she would be, a builder of futures. She had taken the worst moment of her life and turned it into her greatest strength, proving that true power isn't about how loudly you can demand to be heard in one language, but how deeply you can connect with people in many. Lara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. It can be the quiet dignity of a waitress, the hidden knowledge of a scholar, or the unyielding love of a daughter. Damien Blackwood believed his wealth made him invincible, but he forgot that true power lies in character, intelligence, and the courage to speak the truth no matter what language it's in. Lara didn't just get justice for her father. She reclaimed her own identity and turned a weapon of hate into a tool for healing across the globe. What did you think of Lara's incredible journey? Was her revenge justified? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of hidden heroes and justice served. Thank you for watching.